Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. For roll call, Ms. Conover has joined me at the podium here, and Mr. Griffith, are you here? Mr. Griffith? Ms. Jonathan?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Ms. Porras?
I am here.
All righty, and Mr. Griffith, are you here? Well, we do have a quorum, and we'll see if Mr. Griffith joins us as we go. Is there a motion to approve the agenda of tonight's meeting?
So moved, Wendy Jonathan.
Second.
By
Second,
Ms.
Linda Porras.
Sorry, Linda, you're late. Ms. Conover?
Sorry.
And all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Public comment on open session, we'll begin with a public comment on open session items. We have 3 in person today, and we have a number that were written and sent to the board. Some wish to be read aloud, others not, but the ones that are not read aloud, be assured that all board members have had a copy. The first will be our DSTA president, Ms. Trina Gonzalez-Alisi.
Thank you. Good evening, board and cabinet. I just wanted to basically make one of the same statements that I made at the last school board meeting, which is I think it's going to be important for families and the community to realize that if students, or when students and staff are allowed back on campus to be in person teaching and learning, which is by far what everybody wants, that it's not going to look the same. And one of the couple of the things that I mentioned in my last comments was, there won't be any hugs or high fives, there won't be any sitting together at lunch. All of the social aspects that have kind of been stated that students and parents and families are longing for are going to look very, very different. Again, I want to establish that teachers and staff really, really want to be back at the school site and doing their jobs the way that they were intended to be done and the way that they envisioned being done when they decided from the very first time they decided, hey, I think I want to be a teacher. Everybody wants that, and the students want that too. I'm looking forward to the presentations this evening from the cabinet, and just to make sure that there is all of the proper precautions in place for staff as well as students to keep everybody as safe as possible, and that is an understatement. And just to be able to reassure staff that if they are asked to come back on campus, that every aspect will be taken into consideration. And I'm confident that is what the plan is. I'm very confident we've been working very collaboratively together. But I just wanted to make sure that it's stated very strongly, what precautions are going to be in place for students and staff when they return to the school site. So I'm looking forward to the cabinet presentations this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Doug Hassett.
Good evening, board members and cabinet. This will piggyback alongside what Trina just mentioned, and also I looked at the agenda, saw our item 6.1, and I wrote the following. The purpose of government is to reflect the will of the people, but concerning COVID-19 and opening schools, the will of people seems to be dimly lit. The will of moms and dads that want to see their children back in school are being voiced loud and clear, but not nearly as loud in government. I understand this is a process that requires some patience and some grace, and I think parents across the district have done their best, but many are now at their wits' end. I'm remembering what Jim Lovell of Apollo 13 fame said as he was insisting to receive the procedures for returning safely to Earth. He noted the Earth is getting large in the window. The smart people of NASA got to work, overcame tremendous obstacles, and the success of that mission is well known. So what's the procedure for reopening schools and doing so safely? I believe the data and biosecurity measures exist to open schools and minimize the risk. So what's the procedure? It's said these days that we live in a screen culture, and this may be so for entertainment. But concerning education and the youngest students in our district, I question the use of screens when it comes to instruction. For many, it's not working. I'm the parent of a college student that just returned to campus, and then I talk all the time with other parents and teachers around the district here. They're frustrated, and they're wondering when they'll go back to campus. So what's the procedure? Richard Nixon's infamous hatchet man, Chuck Colson, once said, "Salvation will never arrive on Air Force One." We've got smart people in the district, smart people in the county. We're no different than any other organization that can fix the issues at hand. So let's not wait for Air Force One or any entity keeping their thumb on the scale. Let's define the procedure. The next semester is getting large in the window. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And our last speaker is Mr. Humberto Alvarez.
Good evening, board and cabinet, Dr. Bailey. I come bearing two hats. I come wearing a parent hat, but I also am here as a chairperson of our district advisory committee. I'll start off with my parent hat. I no doubt you have parents who are at their wits' end. You also have many parents who understand that we need to go through a process, and there needs to be a safe process laid out. And there's going to be revisions to that process. There's going to be engagement of different stakeholders. Ultimately, there's no doubt we want our children back in the classroom, but when it is safe to do so. When there's an opportunity to engage everyone, staff, but I want to throw in parents as well. Because of that, I want to switch over to my DAC hat, if you will. And as a chairperson, I want to convey that at this time, there are many, many teachers in the classrooms working hard, working to communicate with families day in and day out at many hours of the evening. You have administrators at the school site and at the district level who are working extra hard, communicating with families. Likewise, you have parents in return communicating with their teachers in their schools. What I'm here to ask for is when we have our district advisory committee meetings, I would love to see Dr. Bailey engaging us as parents and having that two-way dialogue. Much more important, I feel, this school year than ever before, because together we're going to get through this. And there's no doubt that there's going to be a lot of tough decisions to be made in due time. And so I am here to, again, invite Dr. Bailey to our meeting and ask that he be a staple at our meeting. It is an opportunity for each school who has an elected parent rep that gets together. There's no better time for Mr. Bailey to be there and engaging with us, sharing the concerns that we have, and together working to resolve them. So I understand there's going to be a process. There is no need to rush through something. Make sure that we are doing what we can. There's no doubt we can get through this. But I just ask that we don't forget our parents. We engage them in what we're going to be doing. I'm looking forward to the presentations and understanding that what better way to communicate it to parents also than through your elected parent groups here at the district level. And I hope to see you at our meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have a number of online public comments that wish to be read today, and we have 16 total that wrote in, and I can go through these here individually. First was Ms. Marie Thompson. Please keep distance learning in place at least until January 2021. Ms. Lucille Herzing. Please keep distance learning until after the Christmas break, then review. Craig Thompson wrote in, but this for the board members only. He asked not to have it read aloud. Ms. Irene Creighton. Online education is challenging, but no one gets sick doing it. As our case numbers go down, the flu season starts up and more outdoor activities will move indoors where spread of any germs will be higher. Thanksgiving is the most traveled holiday, a time when families gather who may live great distances apart, and some will likely go to or come from a state that is surging with COVID. People feel safe with family and may let their guard down to have a normal holiday. Please see some friends too. It's Thanksgiving, they say with their masks off. What could go wrong? Plenty. If a school were to start after that, it would be the perfect opportunity to spread these newly collected germs to a fresh audience, some of whom had stayed home and forgone seeing family to cut the risk. It would only be for 3 weeks of classes, so perfect timing to potentially infect people, and they start to get sick in time for winter break. Add to that the chance that opening may not go entirely smoothly, and this will be at the end of the semester, so classes are trying to finish up in this limited time and don't need other delays or distractions. Believe me, I am very interested in getting hybrid classes going and not being trapped. I mean, having as much valuable time together, but it needs to be done safely. Coming back right after a holiday, when you know some people will have behaved badly or for such a short time of instruction, people spending more time indoors with the flu season underway is not a good idea. Same with coming back after winter break. There should at least be a quarantine period of 2 weeks before people gather en masse, and 3 or 4 would be safer. We do not have home tests to administer daily or even weekly or a tracking system in place if someone becomes ill. Anyone getting sick because they came back to school or bringing it home to their family would be a tragedy that could have been avoided by waiting. Not opening until 2021 is a safer, smarter choice to keep our students, teachers, faculty, and families healthy. Thank you for your time. Alexandra Haralambous, in-person school. Ryan Gray, I would like to ask the board to submit a waiver to reopen in-class learning. This has become a financial hardship as well as detrimental to the mental health of both my wife and 2 children. I grow increasingly frustrated when I see multiple Washington Charter School teachers attending social functions and/or at restaurants and big box stores. Sarah Lippy had a comment that she does not wish it to be read aloud. Monique Childers, why haven't we applied for a reopening waiver of our schools? Do you plan on filing for one? When are you planning on allowing hybrid students to return to school? It is extremely important that our elementary students return to school as soon as possible. Our students are missing out on invaluable time with their teachers and peers. The families who want their students back in school should be allowed to do so. Molly Hill wrote a comment but does not wish to have it read aloud. Robin Harabedian, please open the school for parents and students that want to be in school. Now that the county is in the red tier and is continuing to see number decrease, the kids need to be in school. There is such a disconnect from the teacher-student, and it is not fair to the kids. They should not be learning over a computer. There is not a college student. They need to be in a classroom. Everyone is aware of the new ways and will keep everyone safe. Just open the school. Next is Mark Harabedian. Please open the school for the parents and students that want to be in school. Now that the county is in the red tier and is continuing to see number decrease, the kids need to be in school. There is such a disconnect from the teacher-student and it is not fair to the kids. They should not be learning over a computer. New York is in school and California was nowhere near the numbers that they were seeing. We need to have the schools open to the families who want to be in school. Lindsay Bateman. I do want schools to open back up. I have a kindergartner and a 6th grader. This separation of peers is not healthy. Kids need to be around each other. Parents need to be able to work and not have to homeschool their children. This is doing more damage than good. Kyle Stern. Good evening, staff and board members. Thank you for taking the time to listen to and seriously consider public comment on this critically important issue facing our families as we navigate through these unpredictable times. On behalf of all households with two working parents and uncertain child care options, I implore you to re-engage with and reopen in-person learning opportunities for our kids without further delay. As a household consisting of 2 elementary school children and 2 essential worker parents, we have seen our families stretch to the limit based on the district's decision to continue on the seemingly never-ending experiment of distance learning. I ask you to seriously consider how much learning is actually taking place as we continue to watch our children suffer in long-term social isolation without the benefit of the visceral, tangible, and structured environment that they most certainly deserve inside their properly equipped classrooms with their beloved educators. Combine this with the constant technical difficulties and inadequacies that have been put forth thus far, I believe you will surely come to the same conclusion that I have, which is to say that our young children have most certainly been cheated out of any meaningful educational benefit over the course of the past 7 months. If you come to the same realization, I find it hard to argue with the statement that the district's current course is doing nothing but continuing to widen the gap between the families who have the financial resources to pay for extra educational support for their children in an effort to see them flourish, and those who do not and are in turn forced to watch their kids fall behind their peers. With county-wide hospitalizations and deaths at extremely low levels and our broader infrastructure beginning to reopen, it is time for our schools to do the same. I deeply respect the personal decisions of families who don't feel comfortable and want their kids to stay home. All I ask is that those of us who feel differently be afforded the same opportunity for our kids to learn in a meaningful and beneficial environment with a sense of confidence in the future as opposed to paralysis due to the potential of the unknown. Please reopen in-person learning without further delay, with respect and sincere gratitude. Ms. Cami Jimenez. As a DSUSD parent, my husband and I would like to commend the teachers of Palm Desert High School for providing our son with excellent educational opportunities through distance learning. Our son is being intellectually challenged and stimulated. Most importantly, our son is healthy and safe. He misses his friends, his sports, and the normalcy of life, but realizes that what could have been the greatest impact of his future is the possibility of lifelong health complications. In fact, pediatric cases of COVID have risen from 2.2% in April to 10% in September since schools have gone back. A study from the CDC Prevention found that children ages 12 to 17 made up 2 times the COVID cases as those ages 5 through 11. Sadly, a healthy 19-year-old Chad Dorrell from Appalachian State University just passed away from COVID complications. So in the meantime, my son immerses himself in his studies, conditions, interacts virtually with his friends, and spends quality time with his family. Is it the ideal situation? No, but he is happy, well-adjusted, and most important, healthy. He will not spend his adult years dysfunctional because he was educated for time through distance learning, but instead understands that sometimes sacrifices must be made to protect our fellow humans. Please continue to make decisions based on safety and not pressure. Ms. Julia Breyer had comments, but does not wish to have them read aloud. And finally, Danielle Gray. Why aren't we allowed to have a waiver to petition opening up the schools? And with that, that closes public comments. Moving on, staff conference items. Mr. Bailey.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Tomac. First of all, I would like to thank the board for this opportunity, whereas staff can better describe what a return to in-person learning opportunities may look like under the California Blueprint for a Safer Economy and the prevailing public health guidelines. I wish to also thank Cabinet for putting this presentation together on short notice, and I wish to thank the association presidents for their continued collaboration on this important topic. Today, staff will be, as advertised in the board agenda, seeking general direction from the board regarding in-person learning opportunities. So with that said, I think I am first up to assist in this presentation. There we go. So this is our agenda for the presentation. Basically, I've stated what the objective is. Again, we're looking for general direction. There's no specific decision being made today, but general direction for staff to deliver on is desired. I want to reacquaint us, or first acquaint you with, if you're not aware of the most recent guidelines from the California Department of Education, also the Governor's Office, Blueprint for Safer Economy. If I can get this to advance. There we go. So as you know, we converted from what was the monitoring list to this 4-tier system that I've been speaking about during regular board meetings when we do the COVID updates. Tier 1 is a very widespread, high-risk environment based on adjusted case rates and also positivity rates. So Riverside County, for example, has been in the widespread purple zone for quite some time. We recently just finished what we call a data stabilization period, or we're actually in the data stabilization period right now, which lasts for 2 weeks. So a county has to stay in red for 2 weeks before they can consider moving to the next tier. So I think for us that date is October 7, technically. And then of course we transitioned down to the most minimal, which is tier 4 yellow. To give you context of where these positivity and case rates are currently, this is as of yesterday, and these data are updated every Tuesday. California is at a 7% adjusted case rate. You can see where that falls within the 4-tier system. Riverside County, as of yesterday, 6.7%. And then when we get over to the positivity rates, we're at 3.4% in California, 4.8% in Riverside. But to give you local context, District 4, which is Supervisor Perez's area, where we pull most of our enrollment, is at 9.5%. Again, a deeper look at local context, we pull most of our students, approximately 70%, from the city of Indio. And you can see where total cases, Indio ranks highest in District 4. Schools are eligible for reopening at least some in-person instruction when we move into the red tier. And again, for us, that opportunity begins October 7. The state and county public health guidelines do prevail. In other words, we have to abide by the guidelines, which include many factors, including social distancing and facial coverings. You'll notice that in the DSUSD Moving Forward plan, it's been hosted on our website and was a result of a lot of community input, and I believe a task force of about 44 people is being updated with the most recent guidelines that come in from the state and the county. And now we'll look at what those health and safety preparedness guidelines look like in a current form. So assisting me with that today will be Laura Fisher, Assistant Superintendent, Student Support Services, also Mr. Jordan Aquino, Assistant Superintendent, Business Services. Laura?
Mr. Bailey. As he was speaking before, we have two really guides that we've used all along to update and write our original DSUSD Moving Forward plan. So we are working on updates, and they're in the final plans. And so the one that's on the website now is not the updated one, but will be soon. So we had to look at both the state and county guidance. Most of the time they're right in line. We have confirmed that if there are any discrepancies between the two, we are to rely on the California Department of Public Health in regards to guidelines for health and safety for our schools. So one thing that we're looking at, when I went through and put them side by side with our plan now, I'm looking at making the changes that need to be made in there. So I'm going to go over a few of the changes and then some of the things that didn't change but are important to remember as we're looking at reopening schools. So first, we are looking at a health management system to be able to help us keep track of the important data, contact tracing, testing, surveillance, things like that. And we're looking at a system that would be able to keep that data for both students and staff that is both FERPA and HIPAA compliant, and that would give us that continuous data at our fingertips. Currently, with a minimum essential staff in place, we've been able to keep track of that and continue to collaborate with county public health. But as we bring more people back, both staff and students, we will need to have a more robust system to be able to keep that data accurately. So one of the requirements now is to do that testing for staff, because our staff are considered essential employees, and so they're looking and recommending every 2 months. So we're looking at 25% of our staff every 2 weeks. And again, this health management system would be able to keep all that data for us so we can continue to look at trends and be able to report appropriate data to our public health department. One of the ways that's going to help us continue and keep that testing data is a partnership with Public County Health. In my position for the last 20, 30 years, I've always worked pretty closely with County Public Health, but now I think we're on the phone with them at least once a week, and I have my contacts there, and we talk a lot. It's been a great partnership. And so along with that, we partnered with them for them to be able to use our old Amistad building as a testing center. So it'll be open, obviously, to the public, but with that partnership, our staff would have priority to be able to either use that site to have their testing done or use their current medical plans, which would all provide for COVID-19 testing at no cost. So we would have some options for our staff to be able to get the testing done when it's their time every 2 weeks to have that completed. Another area, as I mentioned, is the exposure, and that's really been a question across the board, even if we've had some positive cases now, to determine who needs to be notified, who should be quarantined or isolated during that time. And we've worked closely with the public health department in giving them the information, and they've helped us determine who to contact. One important piece that is has always been, as far as determining that contact, is if someone has been less than 6 feet to someone and more than 15 minutes, that's considered a close contact. So it really does, if we have questions with that, I'll always be calling county health and say, okay, do you think this class, or not class yet, but this person or this department or this school site, who should we be concerned with, who should we consider as a contact? But it's important to remember that piece. It's the 6 feet, less than 6 feet, more than 15 minutes. And then also with our health management system, if we do determine that there is staff, not only with the positive COVID, but those that could be in contact, it would help us keep track of those that need to be quarantined or in isolation in those time periods. And that information would be updated, per site, per district, so we would know when people should be able to come back. And the other piece with exposure and school closures is in our current document, and it has not changed, but it's always a big question when we're looking at bringing students back and a concern of making sure that things are in place. No matter what color we're in, we may have to still look at individual school closures. And I know that's a concern for many parents. And so when you look at an individual school closure, if there's multiple cases in what they say cohorts, or be classes at a school, or when at least 5% of the total number of teachers, students, and staff become positive cases within a 14-day period, we could end up closing a class, and that would mean all the students and staff would be out for the 14 days. And depending on the numbers, it could close a whole school. So that can be a real factor to look at as we bring students back, knowing you could be going in and out on that 14-day quarantine. We would obviously, as we are doing now, collaborate with our local health officer to determine if there may be other reasons. Maybe public health has been doing investigations or looking at local data, and they can determine maybe whether we need to close a school for that period of time. And usually it is the 14 days. So if it is closed, when it is closed, when can it reopen? And again, we've talked about the 14 days. The schools or the classroom, or depending on what is closed, would have to have obviously the thorough cleaning and disinfection. We would still have public health that would need to come out and investigate and to determine if it can be reopened again. Now, the criteria for closing a school district, which that can happen no matter what color we're in, just like with a specific class or a school. It just depends on if we have an uptick in cases locally. So the superintendent can close a school district if 25% or more of the schools in a district have closed within a 14-day time period. And again, it's always in consultation with public health. And the typical 14 days, the district may typically reopen. And again, it's working with Dr. Kaiser at Riverside County Public Health. And face coverings is always important. There isn't too much of an update. I changed it a little bit in our guidance. But according to the California Department of Public Health, students 3rd grade or older will be required to wear a face covering. Students 2nd grade or below, so our K2 students, are strongly encouraged to wear face coverings. And I've talked to many parents that have been really working on, having their kids tolerate the face mask unless there's some medical reason that they can't. We do have some of our students that are medically fragile, have difficult time communicating, those type things. So a face shield is an acceptable alternative if they're not able to tolerate the mask or for a medical reason cannot wear it. Our deaf, hard of hearing students will also have that option. It's important for them and their teachers for them to be able to read lips. So the face shields are encouraged for them and will be provided to our teachers, nurses, bus drivers, paraeducators. And I want to make sure when I say teachers, it's really certificated staff. Our speech and language pathologist, because obviously they'll be working with speech, and it's important for people, the students, to be able to see their mouth. So those face shields will be provided for staff. And then the N95 masks are truly reserved for our RNs and LVNs that will be caring for students, particularly in close contact, whether it's G-tube feedings or things like that the nurses will. And they'll also be responsible if we have a student that becomes ill at the school site with COVID symptoms, then the schools will have the isolation rooms and those nurses will be working with them. Okay, Jordan.
Good evening, board. So some of the safety preparedness measures that we put in place, at the beginning we purchased a bunch of safety barriers that we put in high traffic student parent areas. So places like the front office, we put them in our counselor offices and our libraries. We have expanded that to all the classrooms. So for every teacher desk, we purchased approximately 1,200 safety barriers for the teacher station, and that it's around 36 by 42 inches. So it's a pretty large safety screen that we have purchased for all classroom spaces for the teacher desks. In addition to that, we have purchased voice amplification systems to help with in-person instruction. Speaking through a mask can be very difficult, so we want to make sure that the sound amplification for our students is heard throughout the whole classroom. So we purchased 1,100 of those devices. In addition to that, we purchased classroom portable air purification systems. So what that is a medical grade HEPA filter standalone unit that we will be placing in every classroom for in-person instruction. We purchased about 1,200 of those. We're expecting our first delivery in the middle of October. Now, a lot of these things that we are going through is subject to the supply chain. So just like everybody else in the country or in the world for that matter, we are all subject to the supply chain. So we place the orders. Our intent is to fill every classroom space with a portable purification system. We've also done things like face shields, reusable and disposable face masks for our employees. We've purchased or have on hand 10 per employee. So we've given the first 5 as a distribution for everybody who's working the first half of the year, and the second half of the year we'll be allocating an additional 5. We also have supply on hand for students. If they choose to return, we will be providing those for students as well. As a supplemental supplemental was the air purification standalone systems. We are also upgrading our HVAC air filters. Now we have to replace our filters at on a schedule. We ordered MERV 13, which is the recommendation, if you look at the California Department of Public Health guidelines, they put as a, for example, MERV 13 per ASHRAE, which is a recommendation from the HVAC engineer folks. Now we've placed an order for MERV 13 as a backup plan because, again, we know a lot of the supply and demand is pretty high. A lot of the demand is high right now and the supply is in limited stock. We did a backup order for also a MERV 11, which is an improvement from where we are currently. Now for those of the audience who might not know what MERV is, basically it's the level of particles that will pass through a filter. So the higher the number, the more, I guess, a filter that you would get in the classroom. So we've upgraded our HVAC filters. We've also have a contract with BergTech for portable hand washing stations. So depending on the size of the school, we have placed these portable hand washing stations for students if and when they return to school, that they have access to additional sites to wash their hands. We have hand sanitizers that we provided for. Our formula for the whole district was 1 18-ounce bottle for every single employee. Not every employee probably received it, but our formula was to make sure that we could get enough hand sanitizer for every department and every school in the district. Now, some of that is based on the discretion of the site. So if you're working within proximity to someone, you can share a hand sanitizer bottle with them. And between me and Pauline, we've been using the same bottle, which is less than an 18-ounce hand sanitizer for the last 4 months. So we provided that for all the schools. And for any classroom that did not have a sink in their classroom for hand washing, we have purchased approximately 500 mounted hand sanitizer dispensers. So we installed the first 150 a couple months ago, and we're currently in the process of installing the last 350 that we still have to install for all of the classrooms without sinks in the district. We've placed it took the balance from our vendor that we've been purchasing our disinfecting misters. We just placed an order for the last 68 disinfecting high capacity misters that they had on stock, and we'll be receiving those. So all of our schools have those disinfecting devices. We purchased additional devices to help speed up the process for our custodians. In addition to that, we will be installing over the next couple of months the installation of bottle filling stations for a lot of our water fountains. Now, the recommendation was to have some type of bottle filling device so students weren't drinking from the fountain, they kind of put their mouth on it or they drink over it. So we have identified the schools that need those filling stations, and we're making sure that there's a minimum of 4. Some of the schools have had those installed in the past. We're making sure that every school has a minimum of 4 bottle filling stations. So some of these water fountains will require some retrofitting, and we're going through that process right now. In addition, safety signage. As you know, we have floor spacing signs to ensure 6 feet of distance. Either if you're waiting in line, we have front office signage to make sure that people enter the building acknowledging that we do have a face mask requirement, capacity for certain rooms. All of our principals in the district to help with classroom space. We've identified the amount of capacity that is available for every single classroom so they could work around how will they schedule in the event of student return. So those are most of the safety preparedness measures that we've implemented. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aquino. And now, as is presented in our DSUSD moving forward plan, Dr. Kelly May Vollmer, Dr. Salazar will be helping us through this section, teaching and learning models.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bailey, and good evening, board. You'll see a slide up now that is familiar to you. We have been sharing this slide as we were preparing to open school for the 2021 school year. And it really outlines the 4 teaching and learning models available to our students and our parents. None of the definitions have changed except for one, and so I want to highlight that for you this evening, and that's the distance learning definition. And specifically, there are 2 areas that I want to call out that are different than what we previously communicated to the board and to the community. And of course, having been in distance learning for a while, we've learned some things that have helped us to formulate these updates in the definition. So if you'll remember previously when we talked about the option for distance learning, we informed the board and the community that students would be able to maintain their school of residence if they chose to remain on distance learning once we brought hybrid online. Well, not online, really, in person, but once we started hybrid learning. We are not going to be able to do that because of the nature of staffing and scheduling classes. So as we transition to adding a hybrid learning model as an option, students that choose to stay on distance learning will be enrolled in Desert Sands Virtual School, which will be housed under Horizon as one of the programs there. We also want the board to know and families to know that just because of the nature of staffing, and Dr. Salazar will go more into that in a few minutes, but having to have some of our teaching staff remain distance learning teachers and other teaching staff become hybrid teachers, we may have some holes in our secondary student schedules. There may be a class that we're not able to fill because we have so few of those teachers, and that teacher may be one of the distance learning teachers and not be able to be the hybrid teacher or vice versa. So in distance learning, in those cases, we'll be filling those holes in student schedules through hvac, which is a completely virtual learning opportunity for our students. It's monitored by a fully credentialed teacher, but they'll receive all that instruction through an hvac course rather than through that direct interaction with the teacher every single day. I'm going to pause for just a second because in addition to these 4 learning models that we have gone over before, there are some considerations that the state has given us, and Laura Fisher's going to explain those quickly.
All right, thank you. The Governor Newsom announced about 4 weeks ago guidance on small group in-person instruction for our students that have the most acute needs. And as the district was looking at that and which group to start with, we looked at our moderate severe students with disabilities. So we did a survey with parents. We have about approximately 350 students in those programs. And we did a survey, got about 128 back, made personal calls, and today we're at 313 out of the 350, which is a good number. With that percentage, the parents were just asked, yes, I would like my student to come back for in-person instruction, and then if they wanted to access the special ed transportation. It came up to be about 60% yes and about 40% no. So we're looking at the programs, and as Mr. Aquino was talking about with the classroom HEPA filters, making sure some of those things are in place to start bringing back our students with acute needs, and then matching those with teachers. So as I said, it's our mod severe and our deaf, hard of hearing programs.
Thank you. And then along those lines, you may remember that we also asked families prior to opening school if they could indicate through a survey which learning model they would prefer once we were able to start in hybrid. We only had about 10,000 of our families respond to that survey, but of those, we landed very similarly to what Mrs. Fisher just described, in that 60% of our families indicating 60% of those 10,000, indicating that they would prefer a hybrid model, and 40% indicating that they would prefer to remain on distance learning. As we progress forward and as we make concrete plans to transition into a hybrid model, whenever that may be, we will have to have hard, concrete numbers because we have to, at that point, assign students to classrooms with teachers. And so we will be, in the very near future, putting out for our community a registration opportunity for them. It will be about a 1-week window, and we will ask at that time every parent or guardian to firmly commit to what learning environment their student will be in once we transition into this hybrid learning environment. And that information will be crucial because that's the way that we're going to connect students with teachers. So those families that we don't hear back from, we will assume that they want to return and we'll place them in that hybrid learning model. So responding to that registration process is crucial. So I'll turn it over now to Dr. Salazar, and she's going to talk about some of the considerations as we start planning for this hybrid model. Oh, and I'm so sorry, I jumped the gun. I'm coming back.
Yeah.
I lied.
That's okay, I'm not going anywhere.
You know, it's funny, just a second ago I was like, don't do that, it's still your turn. All right, so before Dr. Salazar talks about those considerations, we do have two sample schedules for you. One is of the elementary hybrid model, and the other is of the secondary hybrid model, and I'll just take a second to walk you through both of these and just highlight some of the features. So with the elementary hybrid model that you're looking at right now, you're looking at a week at a glance for cohort A. So obviously there's a cohort B as well, and so that would be the reverse of what you're seeing. So cohort A students would come in physically to class on Monday and Tuesday. They would stay there until around noon and then be dismissed for their grab and go lunch, and then have an opportunity at home to do homework in that afternoon block. When they're gone and they've moved on to that afternoon block, if you'll remember from the last board meeting, there was that conversation about the daily live interaction, that it's a requirement in SB 98. So on Monday and Tuesday afternoons, once the cohort A students have been dismissed, the teachers will then go online with the cohort B students that have been working at home asynchronously all day, and also with some of the teachers like PE teachers and music teachers, teachers that usually do prep coverage. They'll be working with some of those students, but they'll have an hour block with the teacher to have some interactive instructional time, even though they're not physically coming in until Thursday or Friday. And that's put in place because our elementary school students, really of all of our student groups, are the least effective at working independently. They're young, and they need direction, and they need interaction with their teacher. So this ensures that they get interaction every single day, even if it's only for a minimal time. And then on Wednesday, for all the cohorts, both A and B, Wednesday is a virtual day, but there is that live interaction and that instruction with the teachers that you see in the blue area there on Wednesday. And then in our secondary model, the secondary model again has that Wednesday as a virtual day, and you still see cohort A and cohort B divided on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And you see a block scheduling. This allows for greater time with the students and the teachers. And so teachers would see their cohort A students in the odd periods on Monday and the even periods on Tuesday. And then there's a virtual homeroom assignment at the end of each day, so that again, there's that daily live interaction with the cohort that's not physically coming in at that time. So meeting that requirement, checking in, answering questions for students, giving any guidance that's necessary. So those are the two examples of the elementary and secondary hybrid model, and now I'll turn it over to Dr. Salazar.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention that about that secondary model is the sample that Dr. Vollmer showed you was for an 8-period day, like for Indio High School. But we have another high school with a 7-period day and 2 other high schools with a 6-period day. So it would be adjusted to fit the periods that are in the particular secondary school. Plus the middle schools, some have varying periods. So some of the things that are really important to understand is as we transition into the hybrid, we do have to have family selection of the instructional model. We cannot start deciding which teachers are going to get distance learning assignments if we don't know how many students want them. So we've got to have that input and like Kelly had said, hard selection from the families. And then teacher and student shifts are going to happen because we're going to have to align our teachers who want to teach distance learning for various reasons, and I'll explain those in a few moments, with the students that want to go on distance and stay that way, come back in hybrid, and that's where we think most of the change will be. Those that stay on distance or those that come into hybrid. The independent study and homeschooling programs are not going to probably have much variation. The bulk of it will be distance and hybrid. So one way that I think is easiest to picture how this works is when we go back to hybrid, you've got your buildings with teachers and students assigned, but the students and teachers who are going to be pulled out because they're teaching distance, they're not going to return. So the kids that are sitting in the seats of the teachers who are doing distance learning, they need to be reassigned to other and distributed through other classrooms. So there will be some teachers that get new students and some students that get new teachers, but the hybrid kids will be coming in and the distance students will be staying home. And we have to do that so that we can maintain our staffing ratio, our student-teacher ratio, because we're not hiring any additional teachers. We just need to redistribute them. And so that will result in some reassignments. Some is there, and then multiple or many we just don't know at this point until we find out how many students are actually going to stay home and how many are going to come back for hybrid. And then we'll know how many reassignments have to take place. And as Dr. Vollmer told you, the distance learning students are going to be housed in a virtual school, not their home school. So that's a lot of pretty complicated and heavy-duty work to get all that figured out before everyone comes back, but we're up for it. In case you want to know, I think it's important information to have. You'd probably ask if I didn't have it on here. How many of our teachers have, because that is the part of the puzzle we do have the answer to right now, how many of our teachers have requested that they want to remain in the distance model? So we have 1,351 certificated non-management employees in our district. Of those 1,351, 1,186 of them are classroom teachers. So in that first group, we have certificated employees that aren't managers, but they don't have a classroom. So we don't have to worry about assigning kids to them if they come back. That would be our counselors, our instructional coaches, librarians, and so on. So of that 1,186 teachers who have a classroom assignment, 67% of them have indicated that they will be returning to the classroom for the hybrid model. 32% have requested to remain in distance teaching for a variety of reasons. And we already agreed with DSTA on a priority criteria for assigning these teachers to the distance opportunities. And the first layer, or the first criteria, would be teachers who have verified medical risk, that if they contract COVID-19, they're at a higher risk for severe complications. There are 140 of those teachers. We have 54 teachers that fall into the second tier of priority for assignment to distance learning, and that would be those who have a verified medical risk of someone who lives in their household for more severe complications of COVID-19, were they to contract that infection. And then we have the third tier group, if there were still spaces available and we needed distance teachers to match up with our distance students, there's 192 of our teachers that indicated that they would like to remain in distance teaching. So, and then we can go on.
Point of order, sorry to interrupt.
Yes?
Could we ask the virtual attendees to mute their mics if they're not speaking, because it's just providing so much feedback, it's hard to hear sometimes. I'm not on microphone, so they wouldn't hear me say that.
Yeah. Yeah. For the, yeah.
Mr. Griffith or Ms. Jonathan and Ms. Porras, could you mute your mics, please? There we go. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to share some information about the history of our collaboration with both of our employee associations since the pandemic began and we shut down schools in March. With CSEA, we've had 2 MOUs. The first one we agreed upon on April 1st, and that was when we had to close the schools down, and we negotiated the effects of that. Then we signed a second MOU with CSEA about reopening and back to work. That MOU was agreed upon in August on the 7th. Now, the MOU with CSEA carries us through the transition to hybrid. That has covered all of the aspects that, and they're taken care of through the end of this year or till whichever time we go back to normal, if that would happen before the end of this year, keeping our fingers crossed. With DSTA, we are now working on our third MOU. So our first one also addressed school closures. That was signed on March 30th. We developed and agreed upon a second one, which just covers the distance learning model that we're in right now at the end of July. And now we are working as Trina said earlier, very positively and collaboratively with DSTA. We've met multiple times over the last 3 weeks, maybe 4 or 5 times already. And we are very close to agreement on an MOU with the Certificated Association. Next slide, please. So an update on everything we agree upon, which is a nice long list, and then what list still needs to be determined is a very short list. So we've already agreed upon such factors as compensation and how we're going to align our distance teachers with the distance students, that the district will determine those hybrid and small group schedules that Mrs. Fisher talked about with their input. That we have recognized an increased need for prep time for teachers during this difficult task that they are doing. The format of committees and meetings and how they're going to take place. Almost every health and safety measure we have agreed upon. Also the surveillance testing for our employees, evaluations, and training. So our next slide shows what needs to be addressed, and it is really just some of the nuances of the in-person and hybrid schedules. We've been sharing those along the way, but we will do a little bit more in-depth discussion of those tomorrow with our association. There's still an issue about face coverings for children ages 2 through 2nd grade that we need to talk about. And then we're going to hammer out some details about the specific plan for small group instruction for those high needs students. And we are meeting again tomorrow afternoon. And I hope to finish this up. We're just about there. And I think that's it for me.
That concludes the actual presentation, and we'd certainly like to entertain board questions, comments. We have the appropriate staff either here in the audience or online that can answer those questions.
Thank you. So I just want, can we move this slide back to the elementary schedule? That's okay. I'm really interested in the elementary schedule. And my question was, so hybrid is going to be half your students?
Correct.
Because I know that a lot of the comments and emails that I'm getting, I'm under the impression that some families think it's going to be 5 days in school, in person. Is the impression that I'm getting from some of the emails and letters and comments.
Okay.
So hybrid is going to be half. So if I was a teacher in Desert Sands, I had, let's say, 30, 32 students. I would only have half of those students
2 days
for cohort A, the other half would be cohort B.
Correct.
Okay, those, let's say 15, just to have a round number, those 15 would come in for 2 days, Monday and Tuesday.
Yes.
To meet with me face to face. They would be here according to this, sample schedule. They would be with me from 8 to 12 o'clock.
That's right.
So we're not talking a whole day. So we're going 8 to 12. They would go home and be working online on schoolwork, whatever. Okay. While I have those 15 with me, the other cohort B,
yes,
is working independently.
Correct. You are not teaching both of them at the same time.
Which would be impossible to do, for me to be responsible for both at the same time. However, because of the live interaction and the Senate bill, afterwards, say after, when would I be meeting with those? From the 1:30 to 2?
Yeah. So if you look at the 1:30 to 2 yellow block on Monday and Tuesday, that's when your A cohort have gone home.
Right.
And then if you look on Thursday and Friday,
that's when I'm meeting with
that's
them.
when you're meeting with cohort B. So this is an example of what happens with cohort A. So on Thursday and Friday, when they're doing their asynchronous learning at home remotely, they get that hour in the afternoon on Thursday and Friday. But on Monday and Tuesday, cohort B, where it says homework for the A, right, it's switched. The other thing I failed to mention, if you don't mind me interjecting really quickly, is both of the schedules do meet the instructional minutes required by Senate Bill 98. And in addition to that, just a little bit further explanation on that block ending early. In an elementary, which you certainly are familiar with this, in an elementary day, there are many things built into that day, such as recess, lunch. You might be meeting with the PE teacher or the music teacher. So even though a student is there all day, they're not with their classroom teacher all day. And so what this schedule allows for is that concentrated time just with that classroom teacher without any of those other interruptions, and also helps with, as you can imagine, the very difficult problem, if you will, of how to social distance students during lunch when our elementary campuses really aren't set up for that, to spread students out to that degree that would be necessary in order to accommodate lunch. So that grab and go lunch allows them to do that at home. And then I just want to add one last thing is even today, we were on a call with Riverside County Public Health and got confirmation that no matter what tier we're in that Mr. Bailey showed of all those tiers, even when you get to yellow, the requirement for social distancing is not lessened. So that is still a requirement. So that's something that we're going to have to be looking at all through those tiers.
Okay, thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
I just wanted to double check that. And also, so it's not going to look the same.
It
In
is
my
not.
classroom, I'm going to have to keep them 6 feet apart. There is no going to be close collaboration. There is no recess. There
No.
is no, I'm going to hang out with my friends at lunch for the
That's
social
correct.
interaction.
Correct.
So we're not having any of that.
That is
Okay.
correct.
So, okay, and what is happening on Wednesdays? In the classroom, is that to give us one day to thoroughly clean?
That gives you that cleaning day in between if you need that. That also allows for the teachers, though, to still be working with the students virtually. So they're still getting the instruction, but it's virtual instruction.
And on that day, I'm doing both cohorts at the same time because
Correct.
it's live and we go back.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, say we start hybrid and for some reason, whatever, my class has to be quarantined. Because as I'm reading articles from, for example, Wisconsin, which is where my granddaughter goes to school, 81 students in her class are on quarantine. And they just started in September. So if my class, for whatever reason, because children are still coming to school even though they have tested positive, okay, and so I would just go right back into distance learning with that group, with both groups, and just going back and forth. And also, from what I gathered from the different instructional models, so right now, when we do start hybrid, my student in Desert Sands right now, who has already bonded, however they've bonded with their teacher, what you're telling me is that they will most likely, in some of them, will not have that same teacher because we don't know if that teacher is one of the ones that has asked to be virtual, to go virtual.
Correct.
So there's a chance that my child, if I go online, if I decide to choose distance learning as a parent, my child will no longer be assigned to Shadow Hills. They will be assigned to Horizon.
Correct.
Right. So for the virtual school. Then so I'm a teacher, I'm being assigned virtually to Horizon. The students that I have, they're going to be distributed to
Correct.
other teachers. So it might not be the teacher that they've become accustomed to
That
right
is
now.
correct.
So there's that adjustment period. So what happens to the grades? I mean, it's not so much a concern in elementary school,
That's correct.
but I'm looking at high school, middle school, mostly high school.
Yeah.
Because those grades go on transcripts.
Right.
So if we started this hybrid in the middle of a marking period, what happens then?
Yeah, and our recommendation would strongly be that we do not start in the middle of a marking period for our secondary students for exactly the reason that you just mentioned, is consistency with attendance and grading, which both have to be reported. And the only way to change a schedule and not lose that data, because we're talking about going from a 6-period day or 7-period day to now a block schedule. The only way to make that transition is to do it at a grading break.
And if I may, that guidance has stayed or remained consistent through our moving forward plan and interaction with the public
Yes.
since the pandemic occurred, actually, so that we can keep clean records. And we refer to marking periods that you may
Semester.
opt, but if you opt, you have to change lanes at the end of that marking period. And the same rule, if you will, applies to this transition.
That's not even talking about if my child is in a 7-period high school and now they have to be assigned to Horizon. Is Horizon going to have the same amount of period? Which I'm not even sure why our high schools are different. But, that's a whole different question that I have.
Not for this discussion.
Yes, that's for this discussion. But so how will that affect my high school student? If he's, let's say, in a high school that has 7 periods, all of a sudden, is he still going to have those 7 periods? Or is he going to lose out on some of the credits that he or she could earn in that school? So that's just another question. Also, I did say I had a few. So testing, as far as staff, I know the recommendation, or is that going to be mandatory every 2 weeks staff gets tested? And I know that you said that they have the option of doing it at Desert Sands or on their own. However, if it's done on their own, will we get those results, or will we make sure, how will we ensure that the staff is going to get tested? Because I can see why it's every 2 weeks, because it's every 14 days, which is great, but how will we ensure that that is being done?
Well, it's the recommendation, obviously, from the state that we're going to enforce to a point. We can't legally make someone go get a test and supply the response. We would document that if they haven't. That's what's so nice about this health management system, is we'd be able to keep track of the staff, and they would. There's different ways that they could download the results, turn them in with this health management system, but we would keep track of those staff members. If they're positive, there's the direction we go with that. If they're negative, obviously they'd be in the system, and then if there's a refusal to do it, that would be documented too. The nice thing is that if someone comes to work, even though they may be refusing to take the test, if they have the symptoms, we can send them home. And that return, as far as not having the symptoms, not having a fever without fever-reducing medication, all of that would still take place. So they would not be able to return until they meet that qualification, even if they're not taking the test.
They're asymptomatic.
Technical term for the testing is surveillance testing.
Yes.
Right,
Yes.
surveillance testing. And we are in a very unique opportunity, at least in Riverside County, that we have a partnership that we've forged with Riverside County Public Health, in that it's hosted on one of our school properties. So that's a very unique arrangement, and we're very much looking forward to that opportunity.
And Ms. Conover, I want to clarify, it's not every employee that gets tested every 2 weeks. Every employee has to be tested once every 2 months.
2 months.
So you take the district's 2,772 employees, you divide them into 4 groups, 25% each. Group 1 has to be tested within a 2-week period. Then Group 2 has a 2-week window, Group 3 and Group 4. So over a 2-month period, 100% of your employees are tested.
Right.
So each employee is tested once every 2 months.
But not mandated.
Right, that's how it's, yes, yes. And so the health management system would be able to notify those employees, depending on what group they're in, and then they would have the opportunity to provide the results back.
And safety barriers. I know Mr. Aquino said safety barriers were purchased for the teacher's desk, which I never sit at my desk, but I'm glad those are there. So, and the students, each of the students, are they going to be in like a little carrel? Is that what it's going to be?
No, so those were purchased for.
What's that? Oh.
So we purchased those for the teacher desks. So none of the student desks are going to have the safety barriers that around them. They will be required to wear a face covering per the California Department of Public Health recommendations, but they will not have a safety screen around them.
And these safety barriers, like, can I move it around with me? Like, if I'm at my board, can I put it somewhere? Or are they like I mean, is it portable?
They are portable, but they're not small.
Okay.
They're 36 inches by 42, I think 42 inches in height. So they're I mean, that's a pretty large safety screen. So.
Okay. And the purification system, I know that some of the classrooms share vents and they share air conditioning. I mean, we share everything in there. Germs, we share everything. Will these purification systems be enough?
Well, that's a really loaded question. I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that type of question. However, the California Department of Public Health pointed out that what districts should do or schools should do is implement an upgrade to their air filtration HVAC system, and that was identified as MERV 13 in the plan. So we are doing that, but in addition to that, we are supplementing the airflow and air purification in the classrooms by providing a HEPA filter, a standalone unit in the classroom. So that is not something that is part of the recommendations, but we are implementing that. So we're doing, as much as we can based on, some of the guidelines that we have through the California Department of Public Health.
It's just an added layer of protection
It's
that's not
layer.
required to have the
But
individual.
it's nice that we are providing that.
Yeah.
That's just an extra. I'm just wanted to ask that. And also, I wrote all kinds of notes, so I'm okay for now. But if I hear something else that triggers,
Those were great questions. Thank you.
I will come back. Thank you.
Mr. Griffith, are you there? No comment? Mrs. Jonathan? Any comments?
Yeah, I just have a couple of comments. I understand that we can't disrupt the middle school and high school because they're on a different schedule than elementary. Elementary, I believe, is on trimesters, correct?
Yes, that is correct, but they also aren't scheduled the way secondary is, so yeah.
And then the high schools are on semesters. So we would have different, if we went into a hybrid model in order to best do it best for the teachers and importantly our students. I mean, this is ultimately what we're here for, is to educate our students. And we need to make sure that those schedules coincide. So obviously if we wanted to start sooner with our elementary, that would be possible, but with the high school, we would have to wait till probably after the first of the year, correct?
That would be our recommendation, yes. Because that would be after the grading break.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, sorry. If I talk, just keep on talking. And I understand about the problem with the teachers, either the students will be moved or the teachers will be moved. There will be some movement there, but ultimately, this would be a decision that the parents have made. So we knew from the very beginning. My understanding is back in September when we first talked about this, and I said, let's start off with distance. We knew that that eventually we would be going into a hybrid, and at least that was our goal. And so we knew that there was going to be having to do some of that shifting. I did want to ask about the instruction specifically, because I see the elementary hybrid model, and I have had the privilege of observing classes. I actually went and didn't go, but I visited classrooms virtually. And I had some wonderful teachers letting me come in and watch them. And I will tell you, we have amazing teachers. But our amazing teachers have their hands tied behind their back, especially when I did not visit anything but elementary, because that's where I'm from. I'm an former elementary school teacher, and I know kind of what our expectations are and what we need to do. And I saw many of our teachers, as incredible as they are, really working hard and watching that window of instruction really narrowed because of failure of the internet was going out with somebody's home at somebody's home. There were all sorts of distractions that were very difficult for, I think, for our teachers. But what I also noticed is that we weren't using our materials that we normally use on a day-to-day basis. And some of I was worried about what things are our students currently missing. In this hybrid model, will we be using the same materials that we're using with the distance learning, or will we be now going back to using more of the hard, the actual materials, the textbooks that we aren't able to do in an elementary setting?
So certainly in that classroom setting, those textbooks are available. However, I do want to indicate that our teachers are using standards-based materials in their instruction.
And I get that, and I understand, and I saw some of the things that they were doing, and I'm telling you, they were incredible. But I also know that I saw things that I'm looking and thinking, if this is where we're going, this is another question I'm going to ask, is there any kind of evaluation we're going to be doing to seeing if our students are getting behind grade, below grade level? I mean, obviously we're not doing state testing, that would be ridiculous.
Right, right.
But what kind of assessments are we doing? Because I'm really worried.
Right.
And that's what I'm hearing from our parents, that they're worried as well, and that's why they want to be in a hybrid model as opposed to a distance model, partially for the academics, because they're concerned that their student is not getting the same level of academics as they were getting in the classroom.
Right.
And I'm concerned about what are we doing, how will that vary? If it's going to be exactly like the distance learning, then why would we switch if we're not going to be doing anything different, except the kids are going to be in the classroom, but they're going to be doing the same kind of things as they were doing in the distance learning as far as academics?
Right. So a twofold answer to that, Mrs. Jonathan. One, in regards to the assessment question. We purchased as a district iReady, which is a universal diagnostic tool, and also provides assessment opportunities and remediation opportunities, and that's in language arts and in math. And so the district is working closely with every single school site to administer those iReady assessments, and the exact purpose of that is to identify those learning gaps and to make sure that we are mitigating any learning loss that we're seeing happening. And then to your second question, certainly, as you mentioned, as amazing as our teachers are and as hardworking as they are, we all know that you can't completely replicate what's done in a face-to-face environment in a virtual environment. And I think that that's probably all the more true with our elementary school students. Like I mentioned before, they're just less independent because of their age. So certainly having students in the classroom with the teacher without all of the other distractions that come in a virtual environment, that certainly will make it different than what you're seeing now.
Okay, and as far as determining it, I don't believe that we're going to have as much struggle with the elementary level, but at a high school level, you mentioned that there are certain teachers that for medical reasons working with having somebody that they take care of that is has medical issues, or just concern in general. I'm assuming that we're going to have some teachers missing that are instrumental in those schools, that now we're going to have a subject that maybe we don't have instructors for. Is that correct?
It's possible, and in that case, they would be on an APEX course, and we do offer all courses in APEX. It's standards level. It's going to be delivered through a virtual platform. But they will have a teacher.
But if they're in a hybrid program, they won't have they would still be going through an APEX, then they would go through that APEX program because the teacher was not in the classroom, correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And I wanted to see if there was anything else that I wanted to talk to you about. Let me see. And do you think that we will be having all the, again, we will have to do it in stages. So I'm looking at, if we're going to be doing anything initially, it would be the elementary schools. How, do you have a timeline when you'd be able to have all those things in place for our students then to go back into a hybrid model?
Actually,
what is your timeline?
I'd like Mrs. Fisher to speak first about the small group or students in most need of acute care, and we'll advance to a potential timeline.
Okay.
Yeah, the small group guidance that came from Governor Newsom was not contingent upon any color that a county may be in. It is to bring them back as soon as possible, so, which is why we did the survey and made the phone calls. So as soon as we get those in place, and of course looking at the teachers and where they fall in medical and different things in regards to their request. But we would be looking at that now, and that small group, or as soon as possible. That small group, we're starting with our students with moderate to severe disabilities, but what the governor communicated in that guidance, it's any group with acute needs. So that can continue to grow with maybe EL students, homeless foster students, it would depend. But that group, we have a timeline on just to make sure we have everything in place for the safety of students and staff. But that would be our first one, which we're looking at along with, and I'll let Dr. Vollmer talk about the other group of October 19th, as far as a recommendation.
So, Mrs. Jonathan, in regards to the timeline, we do have a potential timeline that we are recommending. And so, as Mrs. Fisher said, starting with October 19th, which coincides with the preparations that would need to be made, but in addition to some of the deliveries that Mr. Aquino mentioned earlier that we're waiting to come in. In addition to the small group return, our athletic conditioning at our high schools, CIF as well as the California Department of Health and Riverside County Department of Health have put out guidelines for athletic conditioning. That's not competition. That's just conditioning, and that's done in very small cohorts that come in with the health screening and maintaining those small cohorts, not sharing equipment, lots of regulations like that. Our athletic directors around the district have been working diligently to come up with a very, very intensive set of guidelines that are in line with the state and in line with public health for this athletic conditioning. So based on that, our recommendation is to also allow athletic conditioning in our high school sports to resume on October 19th. And then moving into elementary school students returning to hybrid on November 9th. And then as we've been discussing this evening, coinciding with that grading break, having middle school and high school students return in a hybrid on January 4th after that semester break. And I will just add that we did reach out to other districts in Riverside County, and of the 23, we heard back from 11 of them, and of those 11, there's only one other school district that's considering possibly returning in November or December, but the rest are looking at a January hybrid return.
And which schools, which district is thinking of coming back in November?
I am going to look on my phone and I'll have that for you in a second.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Maybe not that quick of a second. Are there any other questions? If there's any other questions, Ms. Jonathan, I'll look. It's going to take me 1 second.
I'm done with my questions. So
Okay, and
I'll
I'll get
pass
you-
the baton to Mr. Tomac
Perfect.
or Ms. Forrest or whoever.
Jonathan, we can let Ms. Vollmer or Dr. Vollmer give that to us in a Friday letter or something. She doesn't have it right handy. I don't
Well,
wanna
you
press
know,
those issues.
imagine that. I found it sooner than I thought. It's not, don't quote me because this was just what they were considering at the time, but it's Riverside School District.
Very good.
Perfect, thank you.
Let the minutes reflect that Mr. Griffith is with us, but not able to make a transmission, a call to us, but he's been listening. So he has a statement that he would like read, and that includes, we should be opening our schools to the students and families who want in-person classes with those teachers who want to teach in person. There will likely never be a perfect time to reopen. Waiting and looking for the perfect time will cause undue delay to the detriment of our students and families. Thank you, Mr. Griffith. I have a few questions here. First of all, Mr. Kino brought up to our attention that we're going to have safety barriers for the teachers. Now, I've been to banks and hospitals and grocery stores and department stores and you name it, and there are safety barriers between the customer and the business people everywhere. So if that's the case, and we have the barriers, and we have the masks, and we have the social distancing, why can't we have teachers return to the classroom with the students across the board? I mean, there should be no exceptions. That's my first thought on this one. Ms. Vollmer, you mentioned Horizon School. Do you know the attendance numbers? Could you get that to us? If you know that offhand, that'd be great, but a Friday letter would be fine. I'm just sort of curious on that one. And you talked about not all classes may be offered because of students. Are we going to offer all of their core classes and maybe not and limit the electives? Is that the sort of the plan that you have?
Well, until we get the hard numbers, it honestly is really difficult to say exactly what it will look like. We anticipate, because when you consider core classrooms, you have multiple teachers that are credentialed to teach in that subject area, where oftentimes it is your electives where there might be one person on that campus or fewer people. So we anticipate it would be those elective courses, but again, we're just guessing until we actually see the numbers and what the parents request. That's why that registration piece is going to be so important that everyone participate in.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. One thing that does concern me on the list of all of the instruction is the fact that we have 4 hours instruction with just 5-minute breaks between those. And I think that maybe we could start looking at some other options, or maybe extending the period of time between where we're starting and ending the day, where we used to have Saturday classes as well, to offer a little bit more flexibility in that for students so that they're not jamming in for 4 hours worth of instruction with 15 minutes worth of breaks. I can't watch a 4-hour movie with 5-minute breaks in there. I don't know how students can learn new material along those ways. I think that's just very difficult as well. Let's see. Could you define the instruction, asynchronous instruction, a little bit for me, please, what that is planned to do?
Absolutely. Asynchronous literally means that the student is working independently. So they're not, the teacher is not there giving them live instruction and then walking them through guided practice or anything like that. It's an assignment that's pushed out and the student independently does that assignment.
Yeah, well, I noticed what the one set of periods was 35 minutes in small groups. How small are the groups? Or how large can the small groups be at 35 minutes?
Right. So it depends on what the purpose of the group is. So those vary depending on what you're working on, what the content is, how many students have that need. But typically in an elementary school class, if you're talking about a small group, you're talking about 5 kids, maybe.
Okay, so that my concern is if it's much more than 5, that's only 7 minutes per student. I mean, you can ask a lot of questions in the course of 7 minutes and not get through all the kids' questions on that one thing. So somewhere along those periods, that might need to be increased as well, I would think. Let's see. And this one is open for anyone to answer because it was briefed by Dr. Fisher. There, in the initial frames, there was a lot of mays and shoulds in the regulations. Now that opens up the door for a whole lot of things to say, well, it doesn't say so, so we're not going to do this. I'm sort of looking for a little bit more guidance in the mays and the shoulds, saying if this, you know, between 5 and 10, between 10 and 15, give me a number, give me something to look at rather than just a may and say, well, we're not there yet. This is what we got out of the governor. They changed the rules as we happen to be going, so this is why we're in the position. We stopped classes in March. We're not talking about kids going back to school until January, and that's tentative. I would bet half of a mortgage on a January date that all kids are going to be coming back to school, because I don't see the abilities on this one with all the turmoil that's going on. People talking about cures, and I see nothing on those. And I can understand the teachers thought, we don't want to come back until there's a vaccine. I don't see a vaccine coming. I mean, Ebola didn't have a vaccine yet. I mean, how many years is that? And we've got the flu that's only good for 20 or 30%. That certainly isn't one of those things to consider. So those things are off the table as far as I'm concerned. You've got to have something on the line and say, we're going to bring in 20% of our kids 1 day a week for each of the 5 days and go with that so they get at least some in-person instruction one-on-one with teachers, and then you can move on in independent study, which is why I'm a big fan of the Horizon School. You get your work on a Monday, you can come back in off Monday and take a test and reload it again. And I think that is certainly a better alternative than what we're trying to do online, because all the comments that I'm hearing from parents, with the exception of the really exception to the rule, I hear a couple of people are happy with their instruction, but the vast majority I'm hearing it from, and from teachers. The teachers, they're talking about, they give a lesson and they're halfway through and there's nobody there. The kids are off having lunch for an hour, hour and a half. You know, those things are happening in our classroom. So there's no instruction. There's instruction going on, but there's no learning going on. And that's a big difference, and we have to understand the difference between those two. And so those are my comments for today. And lastly, Mrs. Porras, as president, you have some questions and concluding remarks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Tomac, and thank you, staff and Mr. Bailey, for putting this together, and especially at the time crunch that you had to put this together. I really appreciate it. Well, being last, everybody has already asked all the questions, so I'm really, anyway, the only thing that I have, the question that I have as far as to the moderate to acute need students, how many teachers and how many students are in a classroom for those students?
Usually our mod severe classes are 14 and smaller. And with the governor's guidance, we can have a total max of 16 people, which means it can be a combination of students and staff. It changed, the guidance changed a bit from the initial one and it was really due to a lot of us saying that's not going to work, because initially it was 14 with only 2 adults. And we know in our mod severe classes that doesn't work. So it was listened to, and the state changed it to a 16 total. From what we're looking at as far as the responses from parents, it would be very small groups, and we would also be involving our service providers like our speech and language pathologist, our OT, PT, behavior, because a lot of these kids really, even though we've done the teletherapy, to have it in person, which is one of the reasons that this was done, is much more meaningful for our kids that really have difficulty accessing anything virtual. So we're looking at probably a half day, 2.5 hour, 3 hour window for those in-person instruction for our students.
Okay, and so is it pretty much almost like a 1-to-1 ratio per kid? You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Or is it?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
per child would have one teacher and one pathologist, or do you know what I mean? I'm just trying to get a picture in my head.
Okay, well, for example, we would probably, I can just picture some of the schools because I was just doing a spreadsheet for Dr. Salazar for tomorrow. So some of our schools have, our teacher has 6 of their 14 kids that want to come back. And so we could do that small group. There'd be one teacher, but many of our mod severe classes have quite a few one-on-one paras, along with paras that are assigned to that classroom. So many times, even when we were in those wonderful pre-COVID days, a lot of those classrooms have close to one-to-one just as far as adults to students. But we would be looking at how we would bring in speech pathologists and different people to provide services. So there's one teacher, but there's certainly additional adults that would be working with those students.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing Ms. Conover talked about the plexiglass, whatever shield for the teachers around the desk. And then my question was, would each student have that plexiglass around them also, like a little bubble? But Jordan said no. And I think about when Mr. Tomac said that, when you go to a bank and there's the shield, and you go to a store and there's the shield, that's for an encounter that's just very minimal time. And I personally wonder how it would work to have the plexiglass around the desk of the teacher, and the teacher's just going to sit in that desk. The kids are going to sit in their desks and not move. I just think it would be really difficult just thinking about it, because normally teachers are up, and the ones I've seen are up and walking around and interacting and, helping the students. And I don't see how they can keep a 6 foot distance. And I don't know, I'm just trying to figure it out in my head just to see it. But I think that would be difficult. So anyway, but all the questions have been answered. And, of course, I agree that I want our kids to get back into the classroom as soon as it's as safe as possible. And if we have these things in place, we need to do what's best for our teachers and our kids. So anyway, I appreciate the time, and I appreciate you allowing me to ask all the questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Porras.
If I may, I'd like to maybe have Dr. Salazar address how many actual instructional days there are in these models in between the transition for each model. It paints the picture a little differently.
Yeah, so if you look at the timeline that's on the screen in front of you, if we allowed, or were able to bring back our small groups of high-need students and permit athletic conditioning to start on October 19th, until the end of the first semester, that would be 39 instructional days. If we bring the elementary students back to a hybrid model on November 9th, between then and the end of the first semester, which ends on December 18th, that would be 24 instructional days.
And the reason I illustrate that is because if you take out the weekends and non-instructional days, holidays that come in the fall, it minimizes the number of actual days of contact.
Can I ask one more question? I know that they said that that it's not mandated that you have to wear masks second grade and below, correct?
It's highly recommended, but with the understanding that younger children have a difficult time with it, so they do have, and this will be added to our plan, that face shields, some children can tolerate those a little better than the mask that's covering. And then we also have children with medical issues that can't wear them. But it's, it's highly recommended. It is required for third grade and above. And if we have a student or family that doesn't want to do that, then their option would be the distance learning.
The only reason I say that is that I actually have a great nephew who's in preschool. And I also have my newest daughter-in-law, her sister's daughter is in preschool, and they obviously are below second grade. And their school, it's a private school, but they are requiring them to wear masks. Are we not allowed to require them to wear masks?
Well, that's where, when I was talking about setting the guidance from the state and the county side by side and making sure we're implementing, there's our differences of opinion, and one of them did fall between the county and the state with this. And so I called them because I want to make sure we're following the appropriate guidance. And I actually just talked to someone a few hours ago, and they always are saying, and they're working through that, and they're going to be answering that in an Q&A session that they will be putting on the website regarding face coverings is one of them. And so they are always telling us to go back to what the state is saying, and the state is very clear with, we can require third grade and above, strongly recommend. And I agree, I see many children, and I think a lot of our kids will be wearing masks. The requirement would be third grade and up, but I see a lot of our kids, and my daughter is, teaches at Adams, and those parents, even with their children with autism, they are really working on, because they want their children to be protected too, they really are working on having kids tolerate wearing some kind of face covering. So, I'm talking to the county constantly to make sure that we are on the right track with that. But I know right now we can require third grade and above.
I was just curious about that because I think that a lot of the young ones this is part of their routine. Yeah. It's like brushing teeth, put the mask on kind of thing.
Well, and there's cute little, superhero masks and all sorts of cute things I see out at the stores all the time. So the kids kind of think it's cool. It's like Halloween.
Apparently they have Paw Patrol face masks, and I know that from my great nephew. So, But another question I did want to ask you: what about those students that if they decide to go into a hybrid model and they have resource? How is that going to be handled? In this hybrid model?
Well, right now, even in the distance learning, our resource teachers work along with our general ed teachers, just like we did virtually. And actually, more of our kids are getting increased time in general ed classrooms. Our resource teachers are coming in, they're joining the Zoom links, or if our kids need more of a pullout, they address that in distance learning. So it would be the same within a hybrid to ensure those services are done throughout the time that they're in school. Some of our students that have additional, like I said, speech or OT or PT, that can also be done when they're at home in the afternoon. So they would, be able to spend the time in the classroom and have that support there because they're specialized academic instruction. Their IEPs have to be followed. So we'd be looking at that in addition to looking at if they have other services throughout the day.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for dealing with my questions. So, although I did not have as many as Anna Conover, I think she won the award for most questions. Good for you, Anna. You came first. But thank you, all of the cabinet, for the comprehensive presentation you gave for this. And I think that now I'll turn it back over, I guess, to Gary to help direct where we go from here.
And I'm not done yet, Wendy.
Oh,
Just one more comment, because I get this all the time. If the box stores are open, if Walmart is open, I know Mr. Tomac just said, if the cashiers, the bank tellers. I have been teaching for over 20 years, and I know very few, if any, teachers that stand in one spot with a plastic barrier around them. We are expected to be walking around that room. We're expected to be monitoring, because I'm going to have a difficult time monitoring from 6 feet away. So just so that everybody understands that teaching, we're not seated, well, right now we are because we're Zooming, but we're not in one spot all day. That's what I was thinking, if I take that barrier around with me, because it's different, very different. And unless someone is in the classroom all day, it's very hard to understand how this is going to look like. because in most elementary school classrooms, if you walk into a classroom in pre-COVID time, those kids were not in their seated, looking forward. They were working in groups. They were working everywhere. They were not in one static place. And that's what I think people that are not in a classroom, people don't understand that it is going to be totally different. Now these students are going to have to sit in one spot. And if they're coming in my classroom, I'm probably going to go out and hunt up some type of barrier, for the individual little desks. But it is very different. And unless you're in the classroom, I think it's very hard to understand what happens in a classroom. So that was just my closing statement. I think I'm done, Wendy.
Yes, I want to thank the board for listening to our presentation and for the excellent questions. As you can see, this is a very complex problem. If we want to take advantage to the opportunities to bring back some students in-person instruction, which is going to be permissible as of October 7, I believe, assuming we stay stabilized in the red tier currently. We have to be willing to accept, as Mrs. Conover just described, that the hybrid learning model is certainly not the preferred model. If we could snap our fingers, I think everyone in here right now would snap their fingers and we would be back in a simple full model or at least a bifurcated option, whereas we had full versus distance. But that's just not going to happen because we have certain restrictions, otherwise known as public health guidelines, that we have to adhere to. So that drives the need for the hybrid if we want to take advantage of the opportunities. Make no mistake, and that's what we tried to do tonight under full transparency, is describe what the hybrid model actually looks like within those restrictions. And it's very different than what we would like for it to be. The small group interaction obviously is going to be restricted. We have to limit the number of persons in a classroom each time. Students have to wear the appropriate personal protective equipment, as do staff. There are so many restrictions that it drives these models. What I was hoping to get to this evening was direction to staff. Unfortunately, we've been victim of a moving start line, the entire instructional calendar. So if you can imagine that start line just moving until, okay, we're on red, now we're going to stabilize on red, okay, here's your start line. So we think, after scouring the globe for a model and interacting, and literally we've scoured the globe, but interacting with a very innovative and creative staff in collaboration with the unions, we feel like we may have workable models. But again, we seek direction from the board as to when we implement these models. We have before you an opportunity, at least, to respond to a draft timeline that we think is a deliverable for us, and it coincides with natural grade breaks. As we've communicated ever since we started the school year, we change lanes during natural grade breaks. So with that said, we would, again, like for the board to give us some general direction. Maybe I'll defer to the president for that, or any other board member, so that we can walk away this evening knowing what we want to bring back for action at the next regular board meeting, which just happens to be next Tuesday, October 6th, the day before the 7th, which is the start line. So with that, I defer back to the board.
I know that Don Griffith already weighed in with his statement. I do want to say, as a school board member, ultimately our job is to see our students get the best education possible. And the best education possible varies student to student, family to family. That's why we have IB schools, charter schools, etc. But given the current circumstances, we have a distant model. And it is, I believe, our responsibility to look to our parents. And if our parents, certain parents want their children in a hybrid model, I think it's our responsibility to deliver that hybrid model. And I know that we have not, I'm keeping distant at this point as well, like most of the teachers and others, we're trying to be safe, but we're told on October 7th that we have the ability now to open the schools physically if things continue the way they've been doing. And obviously it doesn't look like that's a possibility, and it doesn't seem practical. That being said, I am in full support of looking at this timeline for the hybrid opening, because I think that we have to get our schools open sooner than later. I think that ultimately, there's a book that used to be, I learned everything I needed to learn in kindergarten, which I don't know if that's necessarily true because we do so many academic things in kindergarten, but even just being in a classroom, sharing, doing all of those things, it makes a big difference in those students. And they may be 6 feet apart, but they're 6 feet apart from another student, and they're looking at that student's face, and they're seeing other students around them. And that may be the first time that those students have had that interaction with people their own age. And I think that that's really important for the mental health of our students as well. So I am in support of this timeline for the hybrid opening.
Just a quick question, Mr. Bailey. If we continue in the red zone up to October 7th, you said, what happens if we don't?
If we would revert back to purple before we open schools, then you're stuck in purple and would not be able to open schools.
What happens if we do open and we revert back to purple? Do we still continue in hybrid?
Excellent question, and yes, if you are open when you would revert back, I believe San Diego is a good example of a close call. Schools would remain open if they're already open.
Back and forth yo-yoing. If we open, we're committed.
Yes.
If possible, we go on.
Right, and that's one of the points I made. The only time that we would look at closing, if we've already opened when we were in the red, is if there's specific cases within our schools and district.
That's notwithstanding an order.
Right.
Or if we have increased percentages to the degree of the 5% and the 25% district-wide, then we may have to shut down schools or districts, and that would certainly supersede my comments previous.
At this point, if we make it to October 7th without reverting back to purple, then this timeline makes sense as far as the high schools, obviously, because for them, they would be impacted if their grades get messed up in the changes. So January 4th is fine. Elementary, their break is, or you said around November 18th, so that's when the trimester ends? Is that what I understood?
Trimester break
Okay.
for elementary, but
So then that,
it's not.
So the November 9th date for elementary return to hybrid wasn't coinciding with the grading period because for elementary students, as you know, they have one teacher, so it doesn't impact the same way changing the whole schedule does. That coincides with the arrival of the equipment that Mr. Jordan mentioned.
because the 11th is a holiday, right? Is that a school?
It is, and so in that week, your hybrid A would come for in-person, and your hybrid B would come for in-person. You just missed that Wednesday, which is a nice soft opening, right?
That's fine.
And it's technically the non-instructional or the non-in-person day, so it's a natural launch, if you will, that week. And another thing obviously is driving this is there is a lot of work to do now that we know there may be a start line, right?
Right.
There's a lot of work to do with hard registrations with parents. There's a lot of work to do with assigning staff to those students. We have additional collaboration with our association, DSDA, tomorrow, as outlined. So there's a lot of work to do.
Okay.
And so there are lots of considerations as to why we chose that date.
Then, yes, I am okay with these dates as long as we do make it to October 7th and hybrid, yes.
Mr. Griffith would add as soon as possible, and I would concur with those, the idea. And if this is the dates that you have and that's the best we can do, I would certainly hope that we don't go any further than those dates, because I think it's very difficult to explain to families and parents that 9 months and we still haven't got our act together. And you can push the blame on the governor, the county supervisors, or whoever it is. It's still going to come down to the school district and said, you had 9 months, what have you been doing? And I don't want it to go any further than that. Ms. Porras, you okay with the dates?
Yes, I'm okay with the dates as long as we're staying in the red and it's safe for our kids. And I know that there's a lot of data and work that you guys have to do. So this can at least enable you to get that started. So I'm fine with the dates.
Hey, you have guidance.
All right, with that, I appreciate the board's direction, and we will be bringing this back for an official action come Tuesday during the regular board meeting.
Meeting's adjourned at 7:25. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you for having the meeting. Appreciate it.
Thank you.